it may be the positively bleak month of January, there are still lots of edible mushrooms to be found out there in the woods. And one such species is this Pleurotus ostreatus, or the grey oyster mushroom. And this is fruiting abundantly on this log that I got cut down in my allotment a couple of years ago. You can find oyster mushrooms pretty much all year round. It's the white mushrooms that you usually see during the summer, but it's the grey oyster mushrooms that take the limelight in the winter. So oyster mushrooms are saprobic fungi, which means they're wood rotters, and you will always find them on dead or decaying or diseased wood. So in the case of this one, it is a field maple stump that I had cut down in my allotment, and I noticed sort of mottled colouring around the heartwood in the middle. So I thought that I'd leave these logs. I usually chop them down for firewood, but I thought I'd leave these ones and left them somewhere shaded, and a couple of years later, look what we've got. A massive patch of grey oyster mushrooms, and they are beautiful. Oyster mushrooms are a shelf-like fungi. You can see that they grow in clusters and they can grow quite large. So there's not really any other mushrooms that you can get them confused with when they start to grow this big. The cap starts out kind of like a bluey grey colour, and then it matures to kind of like this tan brown. So if you look closely, you can see that the cap edge is always a little bit lighter than the cap itself, and it's got this sort of wavy, undulating edge as it gets a little bit older. And in the younger mushrooms, the cap is very much more in-rolled. So this mushroom down here, the smaller one, has still got its in-rolled cap margin, but as they get older and a little bit bigger, they start to flatten out and become this kind of shelf shape, and you'll often see them growing in clusters. Underneath the cap, we've got the cream, off-white gills, and they're very crowded and they're decurrent, which means that they run all the way down into the stem. And that's quite an important feature. And even though oyster mushrooms look like they don't have any stem, it's actually hidden inside the wood. So what's really cool about oyster mushrooms is that they are carnivorous, and they actually eat little tiny nematodes within the soil. And they do that by releasing a toxin, and it paralyses them. And eventually it breaks them down, and they can then suck up all of that nutrients and use that for food. So another really cool thing about oyster mushrooms is that they're actually used within mycoremediation. They can help to remove heavy metals and toxins from the soil, and they've also been shown to be able to clean up oil spills. So they could be a really useful mushroom for us in the future. Oyster mushrooms are super easy to cultivate, and they're one of the most common kits that you can buy online. I'm going to be taking some spores from these and mixing it up into a slurry and see if I can inoculate some wood chip beds with them. I have grown oyster mushrooms quite a few times, once in a straw tower that I made back in my orchard that did quite well. But yeah, they're super easy to cultivate, and because of that, you'll often find them in sliced packets of wild mushrooms that you get in the supermarket. The young ones can cook down to not very much at all, but the older ones have got much more of a firm texture, and these are the ones that I love to harvest. So these ones here are perfect. So let me go get my basket. Oyster mushrooms come in a variety of different colours. You get white ones, grey ones, pink and yellow, though the pink and yellow ones are a little bit rarer, and they're a little bit smaller as well. It's the grey oyster mushrooms that are the easiest to identify. These are a pretty large capped mushroom and can sometimes reach over 20 centimetres in diameter. Older mushrooms can have a sort of wavy cap margin, which gives them their common name of oyster mushrooms, said to look a little bit like the waves of an oyster shell. Inside the mushroom, when you cut it open, you'll see really firm white flesh. You can find them in deciduous woodlands, particularly oak and beech. Take a look at the floor for fallen logs and tree stumps, and have a little look up in the trees as well for diseased limbs and broken branches. Whilst grey oysters are a pretty beginner-friendly mushroom to go foraging for, there are a couple of lookalikes that you should probably be aware of. First of those is the oysterlings. These are fairly similar with a kind of shelf shape to them, but they're generally very small and rarely get to much more than a few inches in diameter. And second are the angel wings, and these are quite a bright white mushroom that grow on conifer trees. So as long as you are paying close attention to size and habitat and some of the key features of oyster mushrooms, they are a really safe one to forage for. Oyster mushrooms are super good for us. They are low in calories and fat, but rich in minerals and vitamins. Just a 100 gram serving contains around 33 calories, 3 grams of protein, 0.4 grams of fat, and about 6 grams of carbohydrates. They contain vitamins B2, B3, B5, folate, potassium, and a good amount of dietary fibre as well. They are also really high in antioxidants and have also been shown to be able to improve cognitive health and reduce cancer risk as well. So look at this huge basket of oysters. I'm going to get home now and weigh them and process them. Probably going to dry some, might lacto ferment a few. We'll see. Got quite a few to play with. Right, well I'm home and I'm going to be popping these mushrooms in the fridge until I can be bothered to process them tomorrow. I don't bother I don't wash them because we don't want any more moisture to be getting into the mushrooms because that's how they start to go off quicker. So for best storage, what I do is I just use my little opener brush and I just brush off any dirt. These mushrooms are pretty clean, to be honest with you. I'm probably not even gonna worry too much. They're pretty clean. And now I'm just going to be patting these dry before popping them in the fridge, because you just want them to be as dry as possible, really. And it has been a little bit damp, so I'm just going to pop them on this paper towel just to absorb a bit of water while I brush the others off. So you can see this one was a bit of a sloppy cut. I got actually a bit of tree bark along with this one, so I'm just going to be slicing off that tough stalk bit anyway, that tough stipe. So this is where it was attached to the tree, and that bit's a bit more tougher than the rest of the mushroom. So I'm going to be popping all of these excess bits that I'm cutting off into some cardboard and putting that in my veggie beds out in my garden, because I could very well get a little flush from my veggie beds out there, and if not, the worst that will happen is it'll provide lots of lovely mushroom compost into the soil. Right, now I'm going to be separating out half of these because I'm going to be dehydrating around half of them, and then the rest I'm going to use tomorrow. I'm not quite decided what I'm going to do with them. So I'm just going to pop all the ones that need to go in the fridge in a paper bag, and that will just help absorb any more moisture. And then the rest I'm going to be chopping up to put in the dehydrator. Right, so let's pop these in the fridge. So these will keep in the fridge for a good few days. If they're a little bit fresher, if I'd found them a little bit smaller, they could last a good week, over a week in the fridge. I've actually kept oyster mushrooms for a couple of weeks in the fridge in a paper bag and they've been fine. Oh gosh, I'm going to have to clean this knife. I've got some spruce resin on it. Anyone who's ever harvested spruce resin or any type of resin knows that it is the stickiest stuff in the world to get off your knife. But that is all good shit there. Can you see that? Smells good. I might just eat that. You can eat spruce resin like chewing gum. Right, I'll just use a regular old knifey for this one. So they're fairly rough slices, they've just got to fit in the dehydrating trays really. What we got? You just want to make sure they're not touching each other. Oh, still got some, what are these, velvet shank caps from last week, still in the dehydrator. Right, I've got enough room for that one, I reckon. That stem's quite tough, I might cut that off. That can get used for stocks though, so I'll just leave that as a big chunk so I remember. That's pretty woody, that. See? That can be nice in a stock though. I'll have this on overnight and I'll wake up in the morning and that'll be nice and crispy, and then I can store them in a glass jar and pop them in my pantry. And then by that time, hopefully I've figured out what I'm going to do with the fresh mushrooms. I'm thinking maybe like a confit or a conserve, or I don't know really. We'll see. See what I decide in the morning. It is the next morning and it is darker outside, I think, than what it was when I got home last night. It is such a grim day, but it looks like these oyster mushrooms are nice and dry now. So let's take a closer look and see if we can get them in storage. So it is the next day and all of the oysters are nice and dry and crispy now. And I'm going to be putting these into storage, probably in a glass jar, because they're going to be rehydrated and used in my retreats in April. Right, well, I've got my oyster mushrooms and a large sterilised jar. And what I'm going to be doing actually is starting to make a new wild mushroom mix. I generally don't find too many of the same species that's enough to make like a full jar across a season. So what I like to do is make just kind of like a mixture of wild mushrooms, and then I can just have a little selection all in a jar and then bang those into anything that I need mushrooms added into: risottos, soups, stews, stock, things like that. So these are all going to be used in my retreats in April. So I'm running some spring retreats in Norfolk, and these will be the meals for that. These are actually going to go straight back in the dehydrator because you can see that they're still spongy. They're not fully dry. These ones were the quite large cuts that I did, so I'm just going to pop those back in for like another 20 minutes or so. Then they'll be nice and crispy. You can see they're just starting to yellow a little bit. That's totally normal and fine. You'll find that they do that on the tree when they're starting to dry out in the summertime anyway. So I'm pretty stoked with that little harvest, considering I wasn't expecting to find it at all, and I didn't even have to leave my gate for it. Right, so to grow your own oyster mushrooms at home, find yourself a wild oyster mushroom, chop up some bits of it. In my case, it was a tough fibrous stem that I wasn't going to eat anyway. It's got some bits of bark attached to it. And also this mushroom was quite mature, and you can actually see, I don't know if the camera's going to focus, but can you see all the little hyphae coming off the cap of the mushroom? So I think that will be quite a good starter for my paper, which I've got in this saucepan here. So I've just got some ripped up pieces of cardboard, and then just some random packaging paper as well. So we just want to be submerging this cardboard for a little while. And this isn't absolutely necessary. I've grown oyster mushrooms or lots of other types of mushrooms. Get out, piece of oyster. I've grown lots of different types of mushrooms starting them off in cardboard without sterilising at first, but it's good practice to do it. Yeah, sterilising this cardboard, and then I'll just be letting it cool down and then popping it in this little box here. So I've got my cooled damp paper, and I'm just going to line the bottom of this box with it, and then a few of these strips of wet cardboard as well. And it's good if you can get the corrugated sides free. Gives a little bit more structure for the mycelium to hold on to. Not that it needs it, because they're pretty aggressive. Pop it in. Just make a little mushroom cardboard sandwich, really. And depending on how moist you keep it and where you keep it, you should start to see the mycelium spreading in a couple of weeks. And I'm hoping it won't actually be too long before these start fruiting again. So you never know, in late spring or even in autumn time next year, I might find myself some oyster mushrooms growing. So when I start to see all the mycelium spreading through all of the cardboard, I know that it's ready for me to add it to my beds. And when I add it to my beds, I'll add it in between layers of cardboard so it can stretch across a bigger spot and then work its way through all of the wood chip and the sawdust and the leaves and organic matter that are in all of my veggie beds. So yeah, that is how you can grow mushrooms at home in your garden. We'll do a check back on this in a few months, and I'll let you know how I get on with it. Right, so let's see how my oyster mushrooms from the fridge are looking yesterday. I've decided what I'm going to do with these. These look absolutely banging. They look exactly the same as what they did yesterday. So that's great. Yeah, I finally decided what I'm going to do with these. I'm going to make a little mushroom conserve. So what I do is I cook the mushrooms down with a little bit of garlic and oil and vinegar as well. I make a little brine that I can store these in. So I might make a video on that another day. But yeah, that is how you can find, identify, store and use oyster mushrooms. See you soon.